The air in the Sterling residence was thick with unspoken fear and frustration. Alexander's late wife's sister, Victoria, a woman whose smile never quite reached her eyes, moved through the house with a practiced elegance, a seemingly caring presence that was, in truth, the very source of the suffocating atmosphere. She had been helping to care for Clara since her mother's passing, a role she performed with a subtle, calculated malice. Every worried word she spoke to Alexander, every suggestion she made, was a carefully placed dagger designed to deepen his desperation and isolate him further. Victoria saw Clara's decline not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity, a crucial step in her long-game plot to seize control of the Sterling fortune. As she watched another failed chef retreat from the mansion in defeat, a cold, predatory glint appeared in her eyes. The silence of the house was a symphony of her success. Alexander's despair was a raw, visceral thing, but his loyalty was absolute. The only person he could truly trust was Marcus, his longtime assistant, a man whose pragmatism was a steady anchor in the storm. It was Marcus who, seeing his boss at his lowest, took matters into his own hands. He bypassed the usual exclusive agencies and instead posted a simple, direct job listing online. The ad was deliberately vague, asking for a chef to cook for a particular client with a sensitive palate and offering a life-changing reward. The desperate words, "last resort," were never used, but they hung in the air between every line. Victoria, regaining her composure, stepped forward with a practiced air of injured innocence. "Oh, Alexander, thank goodness you're here. I just caught Lily trying to steal from you." She handed him the documents, her eyes filled with a feigned concern. "She was trying to use a false story about her family to trick me into giving her money. When I refused, she signed these papers, claiming she had a right to your assets. I stopped her, of course." The advertisement, a small beacon of hope in the digital sea, caught Lily's eye as she scrolled through her phone during a rare moment of rest. The promised sum was astronomical, enough to erase her family's debt 10 times over and secure their future. The opportunity felt like a mirage, a cruel joke. Yet the thought of her family's weary faces spurred her on. With a mixture of dread and defiant hope, she submitted her application, a simple resume outlining her experience at her humble street stall, a stark contrast to the Michelin star qualifications of her competitors. Alexander looked from the papers to Lily, his expression unreadable. He saw her panicked eyes, her trembling hands, and the unmistakable terror on her face. He had seen that look before, but only on the faces of his most ruthless business rivals. Never on a woman he was beginning to love. He saw Victoria's cold, triumphant eyes, the same look she had when she thought she had won. The pieces of the puzzle, the missing prenuptial agreement, Clara's illness, Victoria's constant malice, all clicked into place. He didn't see a gold digger. He saw a woman who had been trapped and manipulated. With a slow, deliberate movement, he tore the documents into shreds. The sound of the ripping paper, a symphony of defiance. He looked Victoria directly in the eye, his gaze colder than steel, and said 2 words that shattered her world. "You're fired!" She was one of the few who were called. The limousine that arrived to pick her up was an alien thing, a long, black behemoth that seemed to mock the small, bustling alley she called home. As she stepped out at the Sterling mansion, the sheer scale of the place was overwhelming. It wasn't a house. It was a fortress of glass and steel, a monument to wealth and power. She felt a profound sense of inadequacy. Her simple cotton dress and worn sneakers, a stark contrast to the perfectly tailored suits and starched white uniforms of the other applicants. He turned to Lily, a gentle, protective hand on her shoulder. "It's all right," he said, his voice soft. "It's all right now. I'm here." Victoria stood frozen, the 2 words echoing in the silent kitchen. "You're fired!" She had a dozen scathing remarks, a lifetime of feigned smiles and clever lies, but none of them would come out. The look in Alexander's eyes was not the familiar cold, business-like detachment she was used to, but a fierce, white-hot fury that promised a complete and utter end to her world. The shock on her face quickly twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred as she realized her entire scheme, her years of patient planning, had just been torn to pieces along with the fraudulent documents. She opened her mouth to protest, but Alexander simply raised his hand, a gesture of power so absolute it silenced her instantly. "Get out," he commanded, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. And don't ever come back! The head chef, a statuesque woman named Isabella with an icy glare, surveyed Lily with open contempt. "And who is this?" she sneered, her voice dripping with disdain. "Did someone bring the wrong delivery? The kitchen is not for children." Isabella, an ambitious woman in her own right, had been vying for the permanent head chef position and saw Lily as not just an interloper, but a personal insult. She was not alone in her hostility. The other chefs, a collection of arrogant professionals, viewed the small, unassuming girl from the street with a mixture of pity and condescension. Lily felt their judgment like a physical weight, but she clutched her grandmother's worn recipe book and held her head high. She wasn't here for them. She was here for a chance at a new life, for her family, and for a little girl she hadn't even met yet. The kitchen of the Sterling mansion was a cathedral of culinary art, a gleaming testament to modern gastronomy. State-of-the-art appliances hummed, and every utensil was in its rightful place, a stark contrast to the chaotic, vibrant, and well-loved chaos of Lily's street stall. The competing chefs, all with their impressive resumes and even more impressive egos, worked with a furious intensity. There was a flamboyant French chef creating a delicate foam from rare orchids, a stoic Japanese master assembling a miniature landscape of Wagyu beef and exotic vegetables, and a renowned Italian specialist crafting a pasta dish so intricate it looked like a piece of jewelry. Each dish was a masterpiece, a work of art intended to dazzle the eye and tantalize the most sophisticated palate. As she was escorted out by security, her protest finally spilling out in a series of shrill, broken cries, a profound, heavy silence fell over the room. It was not a tense silence, but a quiet, emotional one. Lily, still shaking, felt a gentle hand on her arm. Alexander led her to a chair and knelt before her, his face a mix of remorse and deep concern. Clara was brought into the room, a fragile, almost translucent figure in a pale dress, her hand held tightly by a concerned nanny. She sat at a small table, her expression utterly blank. One by one, the chefs presented their creations. The French chef offered his orchid foam with a flourish, explaining its complex flavor profile. Clara simply shook her head, her gaze distant. The Japanese chef's miniature garden was met with the same silent rejection. The parade of culinary triumphs continued: a roasted quail, a sea urchin risotto, a deconstructed berry tart, each one a failure. Despair hung in the air, a thick, palpable fog. Alexander, watching from the doorway, felt the familiar tightening in his chest. His hope, once again, was slipping away. "I am so sorry," he said, his voice soft, his gaze searching her face. "I should have known. I should have seen what she was doing. I put you in this situation." Fan 1. Tears streamed down Lily's face, a release of the terror, the betrayal, and the overwhelming relief. She took a shuddering breath and tried to explain. She said my sister was in an accident. She said they needed money for surgery. The words came out in a broken whisper. When it was Lily's turn, the other chefs chuckled, their pity and contempt barely disguised. Isabella smirked, ready to witness the inevitable embarrassment. But Lily ignored them all. She didn't have a high-end recipe. She had her grandmother's. She didn't have a complex theory of flavor pairings. She had empathy. As she looked at Clara's weary face, she didn't see a challenge. She saw a little girl who was sad, a little girl who needed comfort, not a spectacle. Lily, in a quiet corner of the expansive kitchen, took out the simple ingredients she had brought: carrots, potatoes, onions, a few humble spices. She chopped them with a quiet, efficient rhythm, her movements confident and honest. She stirred the pot, letting the gentle, savory aroma of a home-cooked meal fill the sterile air. Alexander's face hardened, a new kind of fury flickering in his eyes. He stood up and took out his phone, his movements sharp and decisive. He spoke to Marcus, his voice low and firm. "Get me a full report on Lily's family, immediately. Check every hospital in the city. Check for any reported accidents. I want a full-scale investigation. Now." He hung up and turned back to Lily, his expression softening. "It's a lie. It has to be. But we will make sure. We will make sure your family is safe. Lily, I promise you that." She didn't plate the dish with tweezers or adorn it with edible flowers. She simply ladled the thick, steaming vegetable stew into a warm, unassuming bowl. The dish was so simple it felt revolutionary. A single sprig of parsley was the only garnish. She walked over to Clara and placed the bowl before her. The aroma, a scent of safety and kindness, was a stark contrast to the sterile air of the mansion. The room fell silent, the chefs holding their breath, Alexander watching with a heavy heart. The fate of his daughter, and Lily's own future, hung in the balance of a single, humble bowl of soup. The silence in the room stretched, thick with anticipation. It was a silence that held the collective breath of everyone present, the haughty chefs, the silently judging Isabella, the nervous nanny, and a father on the brink of collapse. Clara, the fragile core of this tension, looked at the bowl. It wasn't sparkling, it wasn't a piece of art, but it was warm. The steam gently misted her small face. The smell was different from all the others. It wasn't the overpowering scent of rich spices or exotic ingredients. It smelled like home, like a gentle hug. He didn't just offer to protect her, he offered to protect everyone she held dear. In that moment, Lily didn't just see the tycoon who had married her out of convenience. She saw the man who had knelt at her feet, the man whose heart, once so guarded, was now wide open, exposed and vulnerable. She saw a real partner, a real husband. She reached out and touched his hand, her fingers tracing the lines of his palm. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with an emotion she hadn't dared to feel before. A flicker of curiosity, the first in months, appeared in her dull eyes. Slowly, tentatively, she picked up the small, silver spoon. Her hand trembled slightly as she dipped it into the stew. The competing chefs exchanged knowing, pitying glances. "The nerve," Isabella muttered under her breath, but Alexander's eyes were fixed on his daughter. A small, almost imperceptible twitch of a muscle in her cheek was all the hope he needed. The spoon rose to her lips. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a love that had bloomed silently in the halls of his lonely mansion. "Lily," he said, his voice a promise, "you are not a captive in this house. You are its heart. And I want you to stay. Not for Clara, not for convenience, but for me." For everyone in the room held their breath. Clara, who had been watching from the doorway, ran to them, her small arms wrapping around Lily's waist. She looked up at them, her smile wide and bright. "Mama and Daddy," she said, a word she had never used before. In the ruins of Victoria's deceit, a new family had been born, and in their shared vulnerability, a love more powerful than any fortune had finally found its home. The days that followed Victoria's departure were a period of profound and quiet healing. The suffocating air of malice had been replaced by a sense of peace and a newfound lightness. The Sterling mansion, once a fortress of cold opulence, finally felt like a home. Marcus, ever efficient, confirmed Alexander's suspicions. Victoria's story was a complete fabrication. Lily's family was safe and well, blissfully unaware of the drama that had unfolded. Alexander, filled with a renewed sense of responsibility, made sure their new business was flourishing, silently ensuring they would never face financial hardship again. Clara took a hesitant bite. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a slow, wondrous transformation began. Her eyes, once blank and distant, widened slightly. The faintest, most beautiful smile began to curve her lips, a sight so rare it was like watching a flower bloom in a barren desert. She chewed, savored the simple warmth and flavor. And then, without a word, she took another spoonful, and then another. She ate the entire bowl, her movements growing more confident with each bite. The clinking of her spoon against the bowl was the most beautiful sound Alexander had ever heard. Alexander, no longer the distant widower, now moved through the house with an air of purpose and tenderness. He found Lily in the library one evening, huddled in her favorite blanket, and sat beside her. He took her hand in his, a simple, intimate gesture that spoke volumes. "Lily," he began, his voice soft but firm, "our marriage, it began out of desperation. A mistake on my part, but it has become the most important thing in my life. I want to do this right, not just for Clara, but for you, for us." The tension in the room shattered into 1,000 pieces of pure, unadulterated relief. The nanny broke into quiet sobs. The rival chef stared in stunned disbelief. Isabella's jaw dropped in a silent mask of shock and fury. But Alexander saw none of them. His gaze was locked on Lily, who stood humbly by, a quiet observer of her own miracle. He saw not a chef who had passed a test, but a savior who had just saved his daughter. The gratitude that washed over him was overwhelming, a tidal wave of emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. He had found a person who could do what all his money and power could not. In that moment, surrounded by a world he had built, he realized true wealth was not in his bank account, but in the heart of the unassuming girl who had just brought life back to his home. The silence that followed Clara's last spoonful was different from the earlier tension. It was a reverent, fragile silence, like the aftermath of a storm. Alexander strode into the room, his face a mask of profound relief and a dawning, fierce protectiveness. He dismissed the other chefs with a wave of his hand, their stunned protests falling on deaf ears. Isabella, seething with a fury she couldn't express, was given a cold, withering glance that promised her career in this house was over. He then did what the tycoon in him knew best. He took a decisive, public step. The next day, with Clara as their enthusiastic co-conspirator, they stood in front of a small, antique clock in the grand foyer. It had been his late wife's favorite, a treasured relic he had kept for years, a symbol of a past he had been unable to move past. Clara, with Lily's help, placed a small, vibrant potted orchid next to it, a gift she had chosen herself. The old, silent clock and the new, blooming flower stood side by side, a poignant testament to the merging of the past and the present. He stopped in front of Lily. The distance between the powerful, world-weary CEO and the humble, exhausted street chef was vast, a gulf of wealth and experience. But in that moment, it felt non-existent. He looked at her, not with the calculating gaze of a businessman, but with the raw, unguarded eyes of a father who had just been given his child back. That afternoon, he called a press conference, not to announce a new business venture, but to introduce his family. He stood on the stage, a picture of quiet strength, with Lily by his side, her hand clasped firmly in his. Clara stood between them, clutching a small, colorful storybook. The world watched in stunned silence as the reclusive tycoon spoke, not of profits or mergers, but of love, healing, and the simple, profound joy that Lily had brought back into his life. He publicly thanked Lily for her courage and kindness, his eyes filled with an unmistakable devotion. He also announced that he was taking a sabbatical to focus on his family, a shocking move that sent shockwaves through the financial world. "You," he said, his voice low and firm, "you are the only person who can do this." Lily looked up, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and hope. She thought he was going to offer her the job, a position that would change her life forever. But Alexander's mind, fueled by the terrifying months of Clara's illness, was already racing ahead, skipping past logic and professional norms. His fear was a sharp, cold knife in his gut. What if she left? What if she went back to her old life and Clara refused to eat again? The thought was unbearable. He needed to secure her, to bind her to his family in a way that money alone could not. The image of the three of them, the powerful tycoon, the gentle chef, and their radiant little girl, was splashed across every screen, a real-life fairy tale unfolding for the entire world to see. In the heart of a city that was obsessed with wealth and power, the story of how a tycoon's heart was tamed by a girl with a humble, kind soul became a legend. And in their quiet home, filled with the warmth of shared meals and a little girl's happy laughter, a love story, once born of desperation, had finally found its happy beginning. The whirlwind of the press conference eventually settled, leaving a new normal in its wake. For Lily, the adjustment was both a blessing and a challenge. Her face, once anonymous in the bustling streets of Hanoi, now stared back at her from magazines and digital news feeds. The public's fascination with her fairy tale romance was relentless, but Alexander, ever the protector, shielded her from the worst of it. He taught her how to navigate this new world, not by changing who she was, but by reinforcing her quiet confidence. He arranged for private meetings with her family, allowing her to introduce her new husband and daughter without the prying eyes of the media. The moment her parents saw the genuine love and respect in Alexander's eyes, all their fears and anxieties melted away. They saw not a billionaire, but a man who cherished their daughter and had brought happiness back to their lives. He straightened his shoulders, the CEO's armor returning, and made a decision so shocking and final, it stunned even Marcus, who had just entered the room. I'm not going to offer you a job, he declared, his voice echoing in the vast kitchen. I am going to marry you. Immediately. Despite the opulence, Lily never forgot her roots. Her first true act as the lady of the house was to transform one of the sterile, unused kitchens into a space of her own. She brought in her grandmother's old wooden cutting board, the one scarred with 1,000 memories, and her worn recipe notebook. Here, she cooked not for show, but for the simple joy of it. One afternoon, Alexander walked in to find her kneading dough for a batch of fresh bread, the familiar, comforting scent filling the air. He didn't say a word, but simply took off his suit jacket and rolled up his sleeves, his powerful hands, used to shaping empires, now fumbling with flour. Lily laughed, and as they worked side by side, sharing a quiet intimacy that transcended words, she knew that this new life, in this grand mansion, was truly becoming her own. Months turned into a year, and the Sterling family blossomed. Alexander's sabbatical, initially a shocking announcement, had proven to be the best decision of his life. He found a fulfillment in simple family moments that no business deal could ever provide. He learned to bake a passable cookie, read Clara a bedtime story, and, most importantly, rediscovered the man he was before grief had hardened his heart. Lily, too, had found her purpose, her compassion, which had once been limited to a small food stall, now had the power to make a difference on a grander scale. With Alexander's support and resources, she launched Bep Yu Thuong Kitchen of Love, a non-profit foundation dedicated to providing nutritious, home-cooked meals for children in underserved communities. A gasp rippled through the few remaining staff. Lily's world, already spinning from the events of the day, came to a grinding halt. Marry him, the man who owned half the city. It was insane. It was impossible. She looked from Alexander's stern, determined face to Clara, who, a small spoon still in her hand, was now looking at her with wide, pleading eyes, the faint smile still on her lips. She saw in those eyes a silent plea, a desperate hope. She saw Alexander's face, etched with a grief and a fear that mirrored her own desperation to save her family. And then he made the final, irresistible offer. Your family's debt, he said, his voice softer, will be paid in full. They will want for nothing ever again. Bep Yu Thuong quickly became a beacon of hope in the city. Lily oversaw every detail, from sourcing fresh ingredients from local farmers to training volunteers. Her hands, once scarred from burns, now a symbol of her unwavering kindness. The foundation was a testament to her past and a promise for the future. It was a bridge between the two worlds she now inhabited, a way for her to share the profound, life-changing power of a simple, loving meal. Lily's heart tore in two. She was a simple girl from the streets, not a trophy wife. But looking at Clara's vulnerable face, she knew she couldn't leave her. Her deep-seated empathy and the chance to save her family from ruin left her no choice. It was a marriage of convenience, born from a moment of desperation, and she knew it would be a lonely, terrifying road. But she was a fighter. Taking a deep breath, she looked Alexander in the eye, and with a quiet, resolute voice, she agreed. The marriage was a whirlwind, a blur of legal documents and rushed ceremonies that felt more like a business merger than a union of hearts. The wedding was a stark, private affair, held in a cold, marble-floored room of the mansion, with only Marcus and a few silent staff members as witnesses. The officiant spoke of love and commitment, but the words felt hollow and distant, a bitter joke in the face of the desperate arrangement. Lily wore a simple white dress from a department store, a stark contrast to the designer gowns that filled Victoria's wardrobe. The only sign of emotion from Alexander was a brief, almost imperceptible softening in his eyes as he placed a simple gold band on her finger. It wasn't a symbol of love, but a shackle of responsibility, a solemn promise to protect his daughter. Their home, once a sterile, quiet museum, was now alive with the sounds of a real family. Clara, a bright, healthy, and happy child, would often help her mother plan the menus for the foundation, her small, earnest drawings of happy children eating her mother's soup becoming a treasured family memento. On a warm Sunday afternoon, the three of them sat on the floor of the living room, building a fort out of blankets and cushions. As Alexander placed the final pillow, he looked at Lily, then at Clara, and felt a profound sense of peace. He had spent his life building an empire of wealth, but in that moment, He knew he had finally built an empire that truly mattered, an empire of love. Lily's new life was a gilded cage. She was given a lavish suite, but its opulence felt sterile and alienating. Her few, simple belongings, a worn wooden jewelry box, a few books. Her grandmother's recipe notebook looked out of place among the museum-quality furniture and priceless art. She was no longer Lily, the street chef. She was now Mrs. Sterling, a title she wore with a heavy, ill-fitting discomfort. The final chapter of their story was not about a grand finale, but a quiet, beautiful continuation. Lily and Alexander's love had deepened into a silent, unshakable trust, a partnership built on mutual respect and shared dreams. Bep Yu Thuong had grown beyond their wildest expectations, expanding its reach to neighboring provinces. Its success a tribute to Lily's enduring spirit. Alexander, having found a new balance in his life, returned to his company, not as a ruthless tycoon, but as a compassionate leader who prioritized people and purpose over profit. The business world, which had once been his whole life, was now just a part of it, a tool to support his true life's work, his family. The mansion was filled with a chilling animosity that was almost palpable. The staff, gossiping in hushed tones, viewed her as a gold digger, a commoner who had tricked her way into their billionaire's world. Isabella, the head chef she had so effortlessly outshone, was a constant, resentful presence, her cold glares following Lily like a shadow, but the most venomous hostility came from Victoria. Her smiles, once a weapon of subtle cruelty, were now replaced with a thinly veiled fury. She saw Lily as a vulgar intruder, a temporary obstacle who had dared to disrupt her carefully laid plans. Just a common girl playing dress-up, Victoria sneered to a friend on the phone, making sure Lily could overhear. It won't last. He'll get tired of her. They always do. Years passed, and the echoes of their story, the humble chef, the lonely tycoon, the miraculous healing of a little girl, faded into a cherished local legend. Their love was no longer front-page news, but a quiet, enduring presence in their lives. One evening, after a long day, Lily found Alexander in the kitchen, not a stark, sterile room, but a warm, bustling space filled with the scents of spices and herbs. He was trying, a little clumsily, to prepare a dish from her grandmother's recipe book. Lily's only solace was Clara. The small, fragile girl, who had once been a stranger, was now the anchor of her existence. Lily spent her days in Clara's room, a colorful, cheerful sanctuary in the otherwise cold house. She cooked Clara's meals, simple dishes from her past, and told her stories from her childhood. Their bond deepened with each shared secret, each gentle laugh. But the moment Clara was asleep, Lily was alone again, left with the crushing silence of the mansion and the silent, distant presence of her husband. Alexander was polite, almost formal, a ghost in his own home. He would watch them from a distance, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes, but he never crossed the chasm that separated them. He had a wife, but he was still a lonely, grieving widower, and she was still a chef trapped in a marriage of convenience, a prisoner in a house that offered everything but warmth. With each passing day, the sterile, cold atmosphere of the Sterling mansion began to thaw, a change as subtle and profound as the slow turning of seasons. The source of this transformation was Lily. She was a quiet revolutionary. Her rebellion not one of words or defiance, but of simple, genuine kindness. She had brought life and color into Clara's existence. The little girl, once a silent ghost, was now a vibrant presence, her laughter echoing through the halls, a sound so rare and beautiful it made the portraits on the walls seem to smile. Clara followed Lily everywhere, her small hand clutching Lily's apron, a silent testament to the bond they had forged over shared meals and whispered stories. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice soft with affection. Alexander, a man whose life was dictated by schedules, spreadsheets, and public appearances, found himself increasingly drawn to the moments he could observe Lily and Clara together. He would stand in the shadows, unseen, watching Lily patiently teaching Clara to knead dough, her flour-dusted hands guiding the child's small ones. He saw the genuine, easy affection between them, a warmth that had been missing from his life for so long he had forgotten what it felt like. His formidable walls, built from grief and a need for control, began to show cracks. He saw Lily's resilience, her quiet strength in the face of the staff's hostility and Victoria's open scorn. He saw that she was not a gold digger, but a fierce protector of his daughter, a woman of integrity and compassion. He smiled, a genuine, joyful smile that still made her heart flutter. "Just trying to make your famous vegetable stew," he said, gesturing to the pot. "Clara said it's the best thing in the world, and I thought I'd like to try and make it for my two favorite girls." Their relationship, once a cold business transaction, began to warm. He would find her in the kitchen and, to the stunned disbelief of the staff, would try to help. His hands, so accustomed to signing multi-million-dollar deals, fumbling with a vegetable peeler, Lily would laugh. A sound he realized he had never heard before, a sound that filled the cavernous kitchen with a genuine joy. In return, she began to see the man behind the tycoon, a father consumed by grief, a man who was desperately lonely beneath his polished exterior. He wasn't a monster. He was a man who had been drowning and had just found a lifeline. Lily walked over and wrapped her arms around him from behind, her head resting on his back. Clara, now a teenager, walked into the kitchen, a gentle, happy smile on her face. The three of them stood there, together, a perfect, beautiful family. It was a simple moment, but it was everything. Their life was not a fairy tale lived in a glass palace, but a beautiful, messy, and real love story. A testament to the fact that the most valuable treasure in the world isn't found in a vault, but in a home. And the greatest love story is often written not in grand gestures, but in the quiet, gentle rhythm of a life shared together. Victoria, however, watched this budding connection with a venomous fury. Her subtle manipulations were failing. Clara was healthy, Alexander was happy, and her grand plans were crumbling. She was losing her grip on both the house and the fortune she so desperately craved. The final straw came when she overheard Alexander on the phone, telling his assistant to cancel his entire week of meetings to take Lily and Clara to the botanical gardens. This was not the broken, isolated widower she had been nurturing. This was a man falling in love. Her cold, calculated patience snapped. She knew she had to act, and she had to act fast. She retreated to her room, her mind a whirlwind of rage and twisted schemes. She would not lose to a simple girl from the streets. This was war, and she was about to launch her final, most desperate attack. Victoria's attack came not as a frontal assault, but as a silent, creeping poison. She knew she couldn't simply declare war on Lily. That would make her look like the villain. Instead, she chose a more insidious path. She waited for a day when Alexander was at a crucial, unmissable board meeting and Lily was in the kitchen, preparing Clara's lunch. The nanny was in the garden with Clara, and for a few precious, horrifying moments, Lily was alone. The door to the kitchen swung open, and Victoria entered, her face a mask of false concern. "Lily, darling," she cooed, her voice saccharine, "I have terrible news." Lily, her hands deep in a bowl of flour, looked up, her heart instantly in her throat. "What is it?" she asked, her voice a whisper. Victoria sighed dramatically, her hand to her chest. "It's your family. I heard that your younger sister, the one who runs the family business, has been in an accident. It's quite serious." The words hit Lily like a physical blow. The world around her swam. "An accident? How bad?" she stammered, dropping the bowl. Victoria took a step closer, her smile gone, replaced by a cold, triumphant glint in her eyes. "Oh, the details are so hard to get a hold of. But a man from the hospital called, asking for a large sum of money for her surgery. They say they'll have to stop treatment if the payment isn't made soon." Lily's mind went into a panic. The debt was paid, but they were still vulnerable. The thought of her sister, hurt and alone, was unbearable. She turned to Victoria, her eyes filled with frantic desperation. "Please, can you help me? I need to go to them. I need to get the money." Victoria, a master of manipulation, had anticipated this. "I'm so sorry, dear," she said, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Alexander made it very clear that you are not to leave the house without his permission. And he won't be back for hours. You know how important his meetings are?" She paused, letting the words sink in. "Unless—" "There's another way." Lily looked at her, a desperate hope in her eyes. Victoria leaned in, a conspiratorial glint in her eyes. "There are some, documents. Financial documents. That is, if you could just sign them, I could get you the money immediately. It's a small loan, of course, to be paid back in full. Just a formality. She presented a thick stack of papers, an innocuous-looking signature line on the front page. Lily, blinded by panic and grief, didn't read them. She didn't question why Victoria, a woman who despised her, was suddenly so helpful. She saw only the face of her sister, and the only way to save her. Without a moment's hesitation, she grabbed the pen and signed. The moment Lily's signature dried on the paper, Victoria's triumphant facade crumbled, replaced by a sneer of pure, unfiltered malice. "How foolish," she hissed, snatching the documents off the table. "Did you really think I'd help you? The money is a lie, the accident is a lie, everything was a lie." Lily's blood ran cold. The truth, ugly and sharp, cut through her panic. "What have you done?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Their interactions, at first, were formal and brief, punctuated by polite nods and distant thank yous. But one evening, he found her sitting alone in the library, a simple blanket wrapped around her, staring out at the city lights. He sat across from her. The silence between them no longer a chasm, but a quiet, comfortable space. They talked for the first time as people, not as a boss and an employee, or a husband and a wife in name only. Lily spoke of her family, her love for cooking, the simple joys of her old life. Alexander, in turn, spoke of the loneliness of his world, the crushing weight of his responsibilities, and the fear he had carried for Clara. In that moment, a tentative, fragile connection was born, a thread of understanding that hinted at a future beyond their desperate arrangement. The cold shell around his heart, once impenetrable, had finally begun to crack, letting in a sliver of light from the most unexpected source. The fragile understanding between Lily and Alexander was a spark, small but powerful, and it ignited a slow, deliberate change in the mansion. Alexander began to prioritize his time differently. Meetings were shortened, trips were postponed, all in favor of quiet evenings in the library or shared meals with Clara and Lily. He saw the genuine happiness on his daughter's face and realized that this was a form of wealth that far surpassed any financial victory. He started asking Lily about her day, listening intently to her stories about Clara's small triumphs and the challenges of teaching a 5-year-old to make rice balls that didn't fall apart. Victoria laughed, a cruel, ringing sound that echoed in the silent kitchen. "Oh, nothing much. Just had you sign away your legal right to this house. The prenuptial agreement, you see, was never signed. But this document you just signed is a legally binding statement that you have no claim to any of Alexander's assets, including the house, the moment he files for divorce." She held up the paper, waving it like a victory flag. "And believe me, he's going to file for divorce. The moment he sees what you've done, you'll be nothing but a gold digger who tried to steal from him. A common girl who tried to play a dangerous game and lost everything." The sizzle of oil in a hot pan was the only rhythm Lily knew. It was a language she understood far better than the hushed anxieties of her family or the relentless demands of her creditors. At just 22, she was the sole breadwinner. Her small food stall on a bustling Hanoi street corner, a bastion against the looming debt that threatened to swallow them whole. Her hands, scarred from countless burns and cuts, moved with a practiced grace, turning simple ingredients into meals that, for a few precious moments, could make her customers forget their own troubles. She cooked not just with skill, but with a profound, almost spiritual empathy, a belief that a good meal was a form of kindness. This empathy, however, did not pay the bills, and the weight of her family's financial despair was a constant, suffocating presence, heavier than any pot she lifted. Just then, the front door opened, and Alexander's voice boomed through the hall. "Lily, Clara, we're home!" He walked into the kitchen, his face beaming, a bouquet of wildflowers in his hand. The smile froze on his face as he took in the scene, the dropped bowl on the floor, Lily's terrified, tear-streaked face, and Victoria's triumphant, predatory smirk, miles away, in a glass and steel mansion that pierced the city skyline like a spear. Alexander Sterling, a man who commanded global markets with a single word, was utterly powerless. The empire he had built from nothing was a testament to his ruthless will and unyielding control. Yet, here he was, pacing the pristine marble floors of his home, his formidable power meaningless in the face of a 5-year-old's silent protest. His daughter, Clara, was withering away. She was a ghost in the house, her small frame growing thinner, her once bright eyes dull and distant. The best pediatricians, nutritionists, and world-renowned chefs had all been summoned, their expertise and elaborate dishes failing to coax a single, willing bite from her lips. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous.